Hi, welcome to Off Script. I'm Zach Lewis.
And I'm Dr. Draper.
Today on the show, we're taking a look at Wonder Woman 1984. Yes, by popular demand.
Finally.
We had one comment on YouTube that asked us to review it. So here we are. Yes, we're also taking a look at Disney-Pixar's Soul. Both of these films were released at home over the holiday and also in theaters. So we are excited to talk about them both. We're going to get to the news. And we got a little bit of news about the DC cinematic universe as well that we'll talk about in our middle segment, The Death of Cinema. But before we get to all of that, Andy, how was your holiday? We're not quite in 2021 yet, but we're close.
It's been good. I've been resting, watching a lot of films.
Yeah? Anything outside of the show that you've watched recently?
Yeah, so I rewatched Hunt for the Wilder People, which is one of Taika Waititi's earlier comedies before he did Thor Ragnarok and Jojo Rabbit. And man, that movie is just so funny. It's so well done. And then I've been meaning to watch the extended director's cut of Doctor Sleep, which is 3 hours long and it's on HBO Max. And I finally got around to it and really enjoyed it. It's done really well. Like the extra scenes really add a lot to the movie.
We watched that when it came out. Well, it must have been 2019, right?
Yes.
That's good stuff. That's not a bad movie. I need to go back and rewatch it. I'm trying to think if there's anything I've watched. Just Christmas movies. And these, of course. I'm excited to talk about them both. But let's jump into the news. First things first, theaters are getting paid billions in a federal stimulus package. You heard it right. Not us, but them. And we're excited that they're going to be getting something. So, Andy, I think I found this story and sent it to you so I can talk about it. But what do you know about this?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with this, other than that this is primarily for smaller independent theaters like Alamo Drafthouse. It is not for the big boys like Cinemark and AMC.
Yeah, so this is part of a $900 billion stimulus deal that was reached by Congress last Sunday. This includes $15 billion in aid for struggling movie theaters, live venues, and other cultural institutions in what's called a Save Our Stages provision, right? This is money that's specifically dedicated for the arts, independent movie theaters, cultural institutions. I think that's good stuff. This is not going to be going to companies like AMC. Cinemark is not getting a dime of this. According to them, at least, this is going to be exclusively for like real small joints. Maybe even Alamo Drafthouse would be too big. This is just for, little places. The little people, right? The mom and pop shops. And I think that's a good thing. As far as I know, AMC could be getting a chunk of it, right? But I don't think that's so bad. Any hot takes on this, Andy?
Well, it's nice to see theaters getting a little bit of relief in this very troubling time. We know they really need it, and unfortunately, the theaters aren't going to kind of return to normal until the summer or next fall. So there's a long struggle ahead of time, and so hopefully this will help keep them afloat.
Definitely. It says over a third of that $15 billion is going exclusively to movie theaters. So that's not too shabby, right? $5 billion should be going to something like 1,500 live theater companies, about 3,500 movie theaters. So, I'll take it. Why not, right? In times of economic trial and tribulation, why not give the little guy a leg up? I'm sure they could need it. I know AMC will probably be crying about it because they definitely need it. But like I said, I'm sure they'll figure out a way to weasel their way into getting a chunk of that money. So either way. It's exciting. Our next story, Hollywood studio puts MGM itself up for sale at $5 billion. MGM is selling itself, Andy. Have you heard?
I have. In the middle of the streaming wars, which we are hot in the middle of, content is king, and we've seen Disney leverage their properties, namely Marvel and Lucasfilms, Star Wars, and HBO do the same thing with DC and their other properties. So MGM is trying to get bought as well. Their big crown jewel is the James Bond franchise. They don't really have too much else going on, but the Bond franchise is a big deal. So they're trying to get bought by someone, Apple, Netflix, Disney, maybe, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. MGM has a lot of really cool properties. Like you said, their hot properties right now are James Bond and Rocky, which is not that hot, but I know those Creed movies did pretty good. As far as their library goes, they have everything from Gone with the Wind to The Hobbit, right? They own The Handmaid's Tale and a ton, 17,000 hours of TV programming, 4,000 film titles. That's all definitely worth something to the highest bidder when it comes to streaming services. Whoever can get a hold of all of that, I mean, that's tremendous. Personally, I really wish HBO would scoop them up. I wish Warner could buy them. I know that would give a lot more power to Warner Brothers, but I think those James Bond movies look pretty good on HBO Max. I'd like to be able to scroll down and see a little James Bond section. I think that'd be cool, but
see the issue though, like while James Bond is a very successful franchise, and in the article says they're the fifth like highest grossing franchise, you kind of have a merchandising issue though. With Star Wars and Marvel, you can sell toys, you can sell plushies, you can, there's a lot of merchandising money there. With James Bond, what are you going to sell outside the movies? You're not going to sell James Bond action figures.
Hey, there's been some cool video games, but no, you're right. 100%. Like what's hot there.
So while it is a hot property, it is strictly a cinematic / TV or streaming property. You're not going to have merchandising in addition to that. So, but like I said, this is the time to try and be bought when all the big players are trying to control the hot properties.
Do you think anybody's going to pay $5 billion? Are they going to wait for that price to whittle down?
Well, I mean, someone like Apple could buy them. That's definitely chump change for them. I could see Disney would be weird. I don't feel it fits their brand. Even if they, more of their adult stuff goes to Hulu, but it's still not like you said. It would make more sense to go to Netflix or HBO Max.
Yeah.
Or Amazon.
It's weird. It's a weird story, and it's a little bittersweet, right? MGM's been around since like 1924. They're a very storied studio. They've made, Ben-Hur and The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, like a ton of like classic films. They helped shape cinema for what it is today. I don't think they're dying, right? They're just shifting hands, and that's okay. I hope wherever they end up is aware of that, like and values that in the way that they should, So we'll see, I guess, or maybe nobody will buy them. I who knows?
Right? They've been up for sale before, so we'll see.
Yeah. And our last story before we hop into Wonder Woman 1984. Wonder Woman 1984 opens to pandemic best $16.7 million at the Christmas box office, and the third film is already confirmed. This is a bit of a twist, because earlier this week we had a story lined up in here where Patty Jenkins and Gal Gadot were saying they may not return for a third film, and they'll have to wait and see. But obviously they've seen, obviously they've waited, the results are in. We're doing a third Wonder Woman because they made just under $17 million, which is pretty lukewarm normally, but for the coronavirus, is pretty exceptional, right? I think.
Yeah, and that's the domestic take. It's actually done 85 million worldwide, so it is making money overseas. I don't know where we'd be without that kind of international box office. But what it also shows is that people actually came out to the theater and also watched it at home. So it shows that this is essentially a successful hybrid release. And while the HBO numbers are, they never release those, and they never will. Netflix doesn't release numbers either, but according to them, it was a successful release. But it's made way more money than Tenet did, which was really the only other big release of the year, which didn't open online or through streaming as well. So it's given all the factors and the pandemic and all that, it's actually a pretty surprisingly positive release.
Yeah, it's worth looking at immediate competition, right? The same day Disney-Pixar's Soul came out, that didn't come out domestically in box offices, but that did come out in some foreign markets, including China. In total, Soul has turned out $7.6 million, which is
pretty low.
Under half of what Wonder Woman turned out. So all things considered, that's a great showing for Wonder Woman at the box office. I'm glad. I'm glad for all my talk of saying they should offer more movies at home, and this is what consumers want. This is what a free market is, right? Like, hey, movie theaters doing well means I can keep going to see movies at the movie theater. So there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, Andy, how does this stack up to like, Christopher Nolan's claims that like Tenet had to be seen in a theater and couldn't go anywhere else, right? Doesn't this kind of shake that up?
It's pretty contradictory, because this showed that, again, you could watch it at home and people still came out, and like I still want to see it on the big screen, and I might try and do that sometime this week, and we can talk about that more in the review. But I think the hybrid release is actually might push people to just do both. I know I'm excited to, like, I saw it on right when it came out, but I also want to see it in theaters now.
Yeah, and I watched it at home as well. In fact, when we talk about the movie proper, we should probably talk about how we watched it towards the end because I've got some hot takes on that. But
Yeah.
some other small things before we get too far away from this article and jump into Wonder Woman, which is coming shortly, I swear. Everywhere else at the box office, the other films that came out did not do so great, right? News of the
Yeah.
World, the new Tom Hanks feature, made 2.4 million across the world. Promising Young Woman, starring Carey Mulligan, which actually we'll be watching next week. So, spoiler alert, that made $680,000. So that's like a hard bomb. I mean, that's it's
Mhm.
really not great from 1,300 movie theaters. But it's worth mentioning. One more thing in here. I know I saw it. I don't know where it is, but it's in here somewhere. This is going to be the last Wonder Woman movie. Wonder Woman 3 is going to be it, according to the head of film chief Toby Emmerich from Warner Brothers said, we're excited to be able to continue her story with the real life Wonder Woman, Gal and Patty, who will return to conclude the long planned theatrical trilogy.
Mhm.
So, flag in the sand, Wonder Woman 3's it. So maybe they'll expand it, maybe they'll do more, but I didn't notice that before.
You know,
That's interesting.
three seems to be the magic number. When you look at the Marvel universe, you have three main Iron Man movies, three main Captain America movies, and then they kind of show up in other films. So I'm sure we'll have that happen, but you know, it just gets more complicated if you try to do too many of one hero, it seems.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a good way to modernize it, right? Wonder Woman 1 takes place in World War I, Wonder Woman 2, 1984. Wonder Woman 3, modern-ish. That's probably the way to do it, right?
Yeah. Well, we can get into this later, but also DC kind of, they fumbled the beginning of their cinematic universe, and part of what they did is they got to the end too fast.
Mhm.
Batman v Superman is like the third movie in the series, and it's kind of the end of everything. So it's difficult to then introduce new characters when you've already kind of ended your series, or kind of arrived at the big movie too soon.
Yeah, big time. But there's some new characters they've introduced in this new film that I'm excited to talk about. So without further ado, let's jump into the review. Andy, please take it away.
Wonder Woman 1984. So this is the new sequel, Wonder Woman 1984, to 2017's Wonder Woman, featuring Gal Gadot as Diana Prince, returning Chris Pine as Steve Trevor, and newcomer Kristen Wiig and Pedro Pascal. So we find ourselves in 1984, and it's 80s up to the max. We find Diana working at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., where she's just kind of being her thing and still secretly a superhero. Not everyone knows about her, strangely enough. And we meet Barbara Minerva, which is Kristen Wiig's character, who is also working at the Smithsonian. She's a clumsy, kind of a ditzy scientist, anxiety-ridden, unsure, not confident. And they find this stone at the beginning that kind of it's basically like a monkey's paw, well-wishing kind of thing, and she wishes to be more than she is, but all these kind of wishes turn, again, it's like monkey's paw, so you have consequences to everything you wish for, but she turns into kind of a negative superhero. And we also meet Pedro Pascal's Max Lord, who in the comics is kind of a mind control person. He doesn't have a consistent backstory. In this iteration, he is a fast-talking kind of con man trying to sell oil subsidies that are worthless to people. But he gets involved and attains power and influence that he probably shouldn't have. The plot's a little bit convoluted, but that's kind of our setup. I really enjoyed this movie, and I think I'm the only one. I texted Zach and Matt, our good friends, immediately, and I was like, "Oh my god, this reminded me of The Dark Knight." Like it was really intense. I really liked it. It does have a lot of issues, but it's also a lot of fun, and it has a fantastic score. And I think actually the score is probably why I overlooked so much in this movie. But it was a lot of fun, and I liked it a lot. But Zach, what are your thoughts on 1984?
I can't wait to hear what you liked about this movie. I can't wait because it's not bad. That's opening argument. It's really not bad. It is not a bad film. There's a lot in it I like. It's really unique. I think in the first Wonder Woman, Patty Jenkins really had to figure out a way to make her character stand apart, and I think they did that through a unique storyline, a unique setting. The World War One stuff was really cool. The trench warfare. It was almost like a period film, but also Wonder Woman. This kind of takes that, but also runs in this direction of like a classic '80s comic book superhero story, and it's different. It's not like a traditional superhero film. It's unique in its own way, and that comes with its own set of challenges that unfortunately I don't think it manages to overcome. It's a little long. I think the pacing is really poor. I think the editing is questionable, but it's got some really strong performances. I
Right.
like a lot of the writing. I like the action. I like the adventure. I'm kind of split on it. Like, I don't dislike it. I don't dislike this movie. I'll likely recommend it at the end of this, but I cannot wait to hear what Andy Draper loved about this movie because I'm lukewarm on everything. You, however, are not. So, where do we start talking about this?
Um, man, well, there's so many places to start. So let's start with the plot. The plot is a little bit convoluted. You got a lot going on. You
Yeah,
have
yeah, and it's difficult to talk about without spoilers.
yeah, yeah,
That's a big part of this. So yeah,
you have Kristen Wiig as who will become Cheetah, who is another a super villain, well known, and then you also have Max Lord. So you have two villains, and it's kind of a lot. I kind of felt that maybe there was too many, and they didn't really team up in the way that I thought they would, and that's kind of hinted at in the trailer. And like I said, our main plot deals with kind of this monkey paw wishes that come true, but with a price. And really, the plot gets a little bit too big for its own good. Like, it's a global plot. Like people's desires affect the world. Like, there's nuclear missiles and the president and like the king of Egypt and all these things. And there's some globe trotting, and it's the kind of thing, I was saying this before the show, it's the kind of thing that you read in comic books all the time. Like, it's totally a comic book plot, but that doesn't necessarily mean it transfers well to film.
yeah. When I after I watched this, I hopped on Twitter to drop my hot takes, and I think I still feel the same way as I did immediately after the credits rolled. Like, in a lot of ways, this is like one of the best comic book movies I've ever seen because it feels like a comic book. It feels like an issue you would pick up, or like a few issues like bound together, and you'd read them all start to finish, and it's like fun and it's interesting and it goes crazy places. But then you get to the end, and it feels like, okay, that this kind of reached a satisfying conclusion for this immediate plot, and you're done, and you put it down, you go on to the next thing. And in that way, this movie totally works. Like, the plot is tight. I feel like it gets from A to B to C pretty well. The characters are fun. But as like a superhero film, as a part of a larger universe, it's got a lot of like plot holes, and it's got a lot of things that don't make sense, and like it takes some logical leaps for our characters to get to places that don't work, and in a larger universe it doesn't work great, which is why the setting of 1984 is a good thing for Patty Jenkins, because in a lot of ways you don't have to worry about Superman, right? Aquaman's not going to show up at any point to like help out Wonder Woman. She's on her own. This is a story about Diana doing her thing. And it's great to, build a world where we're in 1984 and everybody's wearing goofy clothes, and Chris Pine wears a goofy pair of Nikes from Back to the Future. Like, that's all fun and good. But at the same time, you're going to have to set those kind of opinions to the side when you walk into this movie, and don't think to yourself like, well, how does this work, and how did they manage to pull that off, and well, wait, that wouldn't work logically. Like, just if you can set that, if you can not worry about it, I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, you definitely got to kind of not suspend belief, but just like suspend a little bit of logic for a while. And again, we're used to our superhero movies being very grounded, being very realistic. The Nolan trilogy, a lot of Marvel stuff, and if you look at like things like Winter Soldier or Civil War, those are films that are grounded and have real kind of meaty themes as well about power and balance and things like this. And I think Wonder Woman, also 1984, does have some strong themes too, but they're overshadowed by a lot of clumsy storytelling.
Yeah. Let's talk about the kind of pacing a little bit, because like I said, I think it's difficult to talk about without getting into spoilers, which is not what we do here. The movie has a pretty strong start, I think. And
Hmm.
then, like, dude, like 20 minutes into the first act, it really slows down and it drags. It's a long film. It's 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 35 minutes. And I think
Yeah.
I think it's got a satisfying conclusion. I think it has a satisfying beginning. I think it has a satisfying like slice of middle. But in between those is like a vast wasteland of slow filmmaking. I'm a little spoiled by Wonder Woman 1, right? Like there's like a bunch of action scenes in that movie and they progressively get more interesting. So by the time you get to like, the climax of the film, okay, that movie ended a little CGI heavy for sure. But it definitely feels like Wonder Woman is a force to be reckoned with. And this film, due to our monkey's paw wishing setup kind of thing, that's not really a thing, and that results in Diana not having as many like fun action scenes, and that's a bummer because like that stuff's real good.
Right. It's easy in the first film to have action scenes because they're in the middle of a war, so you can kind of have fights break out whenever. Yeah, the pacing is I would agree it's a big problem. The movie's just too long. Like it, and I'm always skeptical about things that are 2.5, 3 hours long. This is 3 hours, but really, most movies are good at 140 to 150 minutes. Like rarely can people do a full 2 hours, well, much less, much longer. But I feel like these big blockbusters, the studios feel like they got to give people as much these really long films, and like you don't really have to. And again, the pacing in the first half. So you see her. There's a brief, she's got an introductory scene where she there's a small fight that we've seen in the trailer that happens right at the beginning. Then she's not Wonder Woman for like another hour. Like
Yeah.
like all of Act One is a lot of character setup. What I didn't mind, but looking back, it's a long time to not see your hero be the hero, and that was one of the big complaints about The Dark Knight Rises is you don't see Batman for the first 45, 50 minutes.
Right. And by the time we do get there, it's a little bit tamped down because we've been waiting so long. But it's not too tough to watch because of our characters, which are a ton of fun, right? We've got Gal Gadot returning as Diana. We've got Chris Pine returning as Steve Trevor in a way that is a bit baffling, but you'll just have to watch the movie to get
Yeah,
into.
go
We
with
can't really
it.
talk about it here. Yeah. We've got Kristen Wiig appearing as Barbara Minerva, who is Diana's newfound friend at the museum, and we've got Pedro Pascal as Max Lord, all of which are super good. Like I think all four of them are a ton of fun. Chris Pine has the best laughs in this movie. I think his
Yeah.
character definitely has the most skepticism as this fish out of water, like World War I pilot who's now in 1984. Max Lord, played by Pedro Pascal, is tremendous and arguably underrated. He's super good in this movie. He's the sleazy TV executive who's just trying to cut to the front of the line and run the world. They're all super good. Like I think they had a lot of fun making this movie.
Right. It just uh they're good actors, good performances, but kind of the stories together don't really work. I thought Kristen Wiig is good as Cheetah, but she starts the movie doing the Kristen Wiig thing, doing like her mannerisms and kind of quirks that she's known for in all of her like comedy films. That kind of didn't work for me, but once she stops being that and kind of turns more towards the villain, she's a lot more interesting. But again, it seems like they didn't know how to make our villains really work together or really be the big kind of big bads that they're supposed to be.
Yeah, and they do end up there's a synergy there. That's the term I'm looking for. Like towards the end of the film that I actually think is smart for superhero movies. Like you don't often get a lot of superhero movies where there's multiple villains that have their own set of circumstances and goals that are willing to work together to accomplish their goals individually. Like, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So we better team up so we can go against the superhero. That doesn't happen a whole lot in superhero movies. Typically, the superheroes team up against the supervillain. This kind of goes a bit the opposite way, and I think that's really smart. But you don't get a whole lot of like full-on Kristen Wiig doing like the cheetah thing, and you don't actually get a whole lot of like evil Pedro Pascal either. And that's part of the charm in a way. I think it's part of what this movie does well. It subverts that expectation of like a standard just big supervillain CGI fight at the end, and I think that's really smart. But it also again limits how much like action you're getting in the movie. And for 2.5 hours, like you'd think there'd be more. It's a little light on that stuff. It's heavy on exposition. It's light on actual fighting.
Yeah, it and definitely by the time it shows up, there's a big the kind of what you've seen in the trailer, the big kind of roadside confrontation. By the time it shows up, it almost feels like it's inserted just well, we haven't had action for a while, so it's like it doesn't really serve like the story's purpose very much.
So let's talk about the look a little bit because I mentioned the set dressing earlier, right? We're in 1984, and the whole movie knows it. Everything looks like it fell out of the 80s, like almost to a fault. The fun like opening sequence where she's fighting in the mall that's been seen in the trailer, that stuff works really well. But that like Starcourt Mall kind of thing they're doing from the 80s, that's the whole movie. Like it never lets up. It looks like they're in the 80s all the time, for better or worse. And I don't mind that too much as far as the setting goes. But what I did mind was a lot of the visual presentation when it came to like effects. Some of this movie just looks kind of hokey, especially this scene where she's out in like the Middle East, like fighting on like a road with a bunch of trucks. You may see it in the trailer as we're playing here when we're playing this on Facebook Live, but the lighting in that does not like, it doesn't look like they're there. It looks like they filmed it in like a soundstage and like green screened it all behind them. And that happens a lot. And I don't remember that being a thing in the first movie, but like
it doesn't have that Chris Nolan touch of like
no,
actually
it
on the
doesn't feel
road.
very grand. Yeah, it feels a little cheap almost, and that's really a shame. Did you notice that at all? Is that just me?
Looking back, I mean, I've seen a lot of comments about some of the effects, how they look really floaty, or she looks like, you can tell she's suspended from wires, and it's again, it doesn't have the touch when you think about the car chase scene in Tenet. Like it definitely doesn't look like that. These vehicles don't look authentic. They don't look like you said, it doesn't look like you're there.
Mm-hmm. You can't suspend your disbelief, but we do need to talk about the score because you're a big fan.
Yeah, fantastic score by Hans Zimmer, who of course did is no stranger to the comic book genre. He did the Dark Knight trilogy, and he did the first film in the DCEU, which was Man of Steel, which also has a phenomenal soundtrack. And that's one of the things that I feel actually Marvel has not done particularly well is the music of their films. Like if I asked you what is Thor's theme, what is Iron Man's theme or Captain America's theme, like no one knows. But like the music has not been particularly memorable in those films, but it is here. And I think that's one thing that goes with is there are individual scenes that work really well, and when the music is swelling behind it, it really comes together.
100%. The only Marvel theme anybody can hum is the Avengers theme, and that's only because we've had like 7 films it's been featured in, so you've heard it enough that you know it. But otherwise, out of like 22 Marvel movies, nobody knows any of the music. Like none of it sticks around. Even Guardians of the Galaxy, their stuff is licensed. This one definitely goes out of its way to kind of build something better, which I really liked. It sounds a lot more unique. It's a lot sharper too. There's a bit of a violence in the strings towards some of these action scenes that I think really comes out. And the cheetah stuff is really menacing. Hans Zimmer really went out of his way to build something that sounds very appropriate for our character. The only thing I noticed about the score that bothered me is that, and I don't know if you caught that. I'm sure you didn't. So, and are you familiar with the 2007 film Sunshine? It's a Danny Boyle movie.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I totally caught that.
What? Okay, so there's a scene in this movie where rather than make individual music, like make an actual track, Hans Zimmer just opted to license the track from Sunshine, which is like the main music from that movie. And the music in Sunshine is like arguably better than the film. It's been used in trailers before. It's been used in commercials. Weird choice in like a climactic moment for this movie to use music from another movie, but like it's in the credits. They paid for it. They didn't lift it. Like they specifically like licensed it to use. So no problems there. But I was just curious if you ran into that like I did, because it really like it made me sit up on my chair. Like, why are they using music from another movie?
I mean, it fits the scene, and I think that's why. Like, I mean, I noticed it right away. I was like, "That's John Murphy's Adagio Indeed from Sunshine."
It's iconic. Yeah.
It fits the scene, and like as a musician, especially like he could write something like that, but that it just fits the scene so well. Like he's like just use this. Like he would just write something that was very similar, so you might as well use the real thing.
Yeah,
and if you've seen Man of Steel, there is kind of learning to fly sequence in that film as well, which he has written some really good original music. But again, he's done that. It would be like what we get by using that theme.
Right. Right, it would just be a knockoff. Yeah, I know when they typically edit films, like for music, they'll cut the movie and they cut the scenes in like the rough cut to soundtracks from other films. Usually they'll say,
Mhm.
okay, well, this is an action sequence. We want something that sounds actiony. They'll grab an action track from some other movie, something popular, just something else. And then in the editing room, they'll cut it to that. And then when it actually goes to the composer to compose the track, he has a rough idea of the beat, of like what it's going to look like, kind of how the scene moves along, and they can compose effectively to that. For all we know, yeah, maybe in that scene he was just like, I'm not going to come up with anything better than that. Just use that. Yeah, like just license it and we'll roll with it. It's a re-recording. I checked. it's an orchestral re-recording, so they re-recorded the music. It's a new mix, but otherwise, the soundtrack is great. It was just the one odd thing that stood out to me. Like, well, hold on, that's weird, but I like the soundtrack.
Well, and it grabbed me from the beginning. So the film opens with kind of on Themyscira, and there's a big kind of Olympic level event going on, and the music's really pumping from the beginning, and I was all about it. I was with it from the get go, which reminds me that there's kind of two introductions to this movie, which I think is kind of an issue. There's this Olympic thing that happens on the island, and then there's the mall scene.
Uh-huh. And they don't exactly clash, but in the Olympic one, right at the beginning, Diana is intimated a message by Robin Wright in her brief appearance in this film that she shouldn't cheat. You can't take shortcuts in life. You have to do things the hard way because that's how you learn and that's how you grow, right? And that like kind of comes through later in the movie. It's a little obscure as a theme, and it makes me wonder if they just left that scene in that opening scene on Themyscira because like it was good for people who didn't see the first movie, and like it would be a good reminder of where she came from, kind of. Because otherwise, it does not need to be in there, and it's a little perplexing. It's well directed, it's well cut, it's a good scene, but it feels like there's other scenes in this movie they shot and didn't use because like based on some of the kind of plot points that are confusing, it feels like I don't know. I wonder if something got lost in the editing. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, the opening Olympics theme is also scene is also an excuse to kind of see Connie Nielsen and Robin Wright in their roles, which they were in the first one as well. We only kind of see them at the beginning, so that kind of felt the reason as they were there. But you're right, the theme. And I did like some of the themes, but that one kind of is introduced and then doesn't really come back up. What I wanted to say, though, is that while this is nostalgic for the 80s, it also doesn't leave out like the negative things about the 80s, like the excess, the Cold War, fear of nuclear annihilation. Those things are brought up as well. And like, this reminded me of Wall Street, the greed is good kind of attitude of that era. And that is definitely part of one of the themes in the film is greed and excess and like the cost of that.
Yeah, and I really got stuck on the 80s stuff because like I said, the film is draped in 80s. Like every scene, 80s stuff, 80s lights, 80s accessories, 80s paints, 80s patterns, 80s clothes, like it's all 80s. And I appreciate like the consistency of that, but it doesn't feel like it serves a whole lot of like the greater purpose of the movie. Like there's no reason fundamentally it feels like this movie had to be set in the 80s. Like why couldn't this have been a 2020 film? And I don't have a good answer. Like it seems like it kind of could have. So it's odd.
Well, that kind of is the DC problem of like, well, you introduce Wonder Woman kind of at the end of that film cycle. So like,
Right, like Wonder Woman, at least the first one, like I know it was set in World War One, but like it was a really captivating setting that created an interesting plot. And there's a lack of technology there, and there's a lack of understanding of the world. So Diana kind of gets to the mainland. She's kind of discovering the world for herself, and everything's pretty simple and easy to understand. Now we're in the 80s, and like there's no real reason for it to be 80s other than like 80s is trending, right? People consumers like the 80s. If we set our movie during the 80s, people will like it. So like I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it. It's just unique. But it's a lot of those unique things in this feature that made me like it ultimately. And I don't think it deserves a lot of the scathing reviews it's gotten. I don't think it's that bad, but I also don't think it's like great. It's kind of right in the middle for me. And I don't know. I guess that leaves it open to interpretation, right?
Right. Let's talk about our viewing experiences. We wanted to get into this.
Yes. So I watched this at home It was the day after Christmas. I was at home with my parents and my sister and Christine. We all hung out in our living room in Houston and watched this. We had a big bowl of popcorn my dad made. We hung out and like made comments and like laughed at stuff together. Like we all had drinks. Like it was great, dude. It was so much better because like, we did the math after the movie. Like there were what, 5 of us. So that would have been probably $50 to go see this at a theater, like not including any concessions, which we were eating and drinking the whole time. Like it would have been such a hassle to go to a movie theater to watch this. It was so much cooler to hang out like day after a holiday and watch this with my family. So much better. Like a memorable experience, something like I really enjoyed. But I haven't heard that online. I know obviously a lot of people went and saw it. It made $16 million here in the United States. How did you watch it?
So I also watched it at home. I started it like as soon as I could. I was a little bit after 11 a.m. our time. And I enjoyed, it's a long movie. So I enjoyed being able to kind of pause it and get a snack or use the restroom, that sort of thing. And I do that a lot with anytime I'm watching something, like I'll pause at like the end of a scene to do whatever, check my phone.
Sure.
And so it's nice. It definitely made me yearn for the theatrical experience, because I was like, some of this would look so amazing on the big screen, even though the story's got its problems and the film has some issues. Seeing some of the scenes on the big screen would work really well, and especially like some of the some of the CGI that people complain about or that doesn't look really great always looks better on the big screen, just because it gets blurred a little bit. It gets it hides the seams better.
Yeah, and I stress thinking that like maybe that's a big part of the reason Patty Jenkins wanted this in theaters so bad. Patty Jenkins and Gal Gadot both got paid extra money when Warner Brothers announced this was coming to HBO Max. Gal Gadot got paid an extra $10 million. Patty Jenkins is an undetermined amount. It wasn't announced. Patty Jenkins said, fundamentally, before the numbers came out for how it did in theaters, Patty Jenkins straight up said, if the third one's not in theaters, I'm probably not doing it. Gal Gadot kind of said the same thing. If the third one's not going to movie theaters, I'm probably not going to be in that movie. There's been this huge push for Wonder Woman 1984 to be in theaters. Cinemark was running banner ads for months saying, hey, watching movies is fun, but watching them in theaters is better. And they marketed that with Wonder Woman 1984, this big mall scene. They did this big swoop. The music comes in. We watched that ad a half dozen times because we've been, risking our lives to go to the movies
at least
to do this goofy podcast. Yeah. Like, theaters want it in theaters. The director wants it in theaters. The actress wants it. Like, everybody wants this movie to be in theaters. And what stresses me is not that this 2.5-hour epic has to be seen in theaters. It's that it hides the seams better when it's in theaters, because you paid to be there. You're suspended in the moment, and it's big on the screen. And you can't look at everything all at once, and it hides it better. And it's like, that's really not good. That's not a good reason to want your movie to be in theaters. Like, your movie should be pretty standalone on its own. And I hope that's not what it is. I don't want to attribute any malice to that, but like, dude, this movie was supposed to come out in March, and there's some prevalent problems I think could have been fixed in post. Between March and now, there's some things they could have changed about this movie that would have made it better, but they opted not to. This was like the final cut. This is like approved. This is what they wanted. So I guess it's a wash, man. But like, personally, I much rather would have watched this movie at home, and I'm glad I did.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the beauty of hybrid release. It shows the success of it. People can watch it at home if they want. People will still go out to theaters because you may not have a great sound system at home or a great environment to watch it, and may really want the theatrical experience.
Yeah. And I mean it. Like, I think there's more that could have changed between now and then. I guess they just decided not to. But for what it's worth, I'm glad we have the opportunity to talk about it, and I'm glad I got to watch it at home. Like, honestly, it was nice. I no regrets. So yeah, is there a chance you go see this in theaters after you've already seen it once?
Definitely, I definitely want to. I'll find like an AM showing that's like $6 and see it there.
2.5 hours, man! What a commitment. Well, shoot, maybe I'll go with you. Might enjoy it more the second time around. But any other thoughts before recommendations?
I think I'm ready.
Andy, would you recommend Wonder Woman 1984?
I would. I really enjoyed it. It's a very fun movie. There's lots of action. If you're a big comic book fan like I am, I think you'll enjoy it probably a little bit more. It does have some issues. It's way too long. The pacing is a little kind of off, especially the first act. You don't see her be Wonder Woman for almost an hour at the first part of the film. There's some narrative issues which you just kind of have to go with, or you're not going to enjoy the film. And the reactions have been pretty split, but overall, I recommend it, especially if you can watch it at home. If you're already subscribed to HBO Max, it's definitely worth your time.
I think I'd recommend it as well. I think it suffers from some problems. I think if you're going to see this movie and you're not sure what you're getting into, first step, suspend disbelief. Do not address a whole lot of logic to some of the things that happen, because there are scenes when a character will offhandedly perform an action that does not make any sense. Obviously, this is a superhero movie. It doesn't make sense. The characters can punch through walls and stuff, but like you'll know what I mean when you're watching it. The performances are great. Pedro Pascal is a ton of fun. Chris Pine is very funny in this movie. I enjoyed Kristen Wiig. I enjoyed Gal Gadot. I like the soundtrack. Ultimately, if you can look at this more as a comic book feature and less as a like extended universe superhero film that's supposed to move the needle on what's going on in DCEU, I think you'll like it. But if you're looking at this as like a part of a larger picture, you might come out frustrated. So take it easy, right? Keep it sleazy and enjoy Wonder Woman 1984 responsibly, I guess. Right. And with that, we should move on to our next segment. Andy, you want to introduce us?
It's time for the death of cinema. So today we're going to be talking about this article that came out in the New York Times just yesterday called "Managing Movie Superheroes is About to Get a Lot More Complicated." And this was an interview with the head of DC Films, Walter Hamada, who is making some bold decisions for DC, I think based partially off the success of Wonder Woman 1984. The big news is that they are about to ramp up production on films and TV shows starting in 2022. In 2022, they want to release 4 films per year, so 4 big films, and then also have tie-in TV shows on HBO Max, just like Disney is doing with their Star Wars and Marvel shows. They're having complementary shows on their streaming service. So they're really ramping things up. And the other big thing is because DC has kind of fumbled their cinematic universe early on, they basically have 2 choices. They either have to start over, which is a huge commitment, and you could also mess that up again. But what they're going to do is introduce the concept of the multiverse, which is very common in comics. And this is just the idea that there are parallel worlds like Earth 1, Earth 2, and so on, where you have the same superheroes but in different settings. And so what this means is specifically like Batman, the Ben Affleck Batman is Earth 1, but the Robert Pattinson Batman is going to be Earth 2. So this way you can have multiple versions of the same character all existing at the same time. This is a little confusing even in comics. So it's a bold decision, but I think it's also one that kind of has to happen. They don't really have any other choice at this point.
I think it's very confusing. Exactly. I think they are very inspired by like some of the other comic book properties and what they've done. This is something DC is not particularly good at, but Marvel is particularly skilled at. Marvel is great at having characters cross over and interact with each other across films, right? Whether that be in extended credit scene at the end of your movie, or in the middle of a movie when a character pops up, or in a fight scene when another superhero swings in and they like combine powers to do cool stuff. That happens a lot in those Marvel movies, and they're very good at it. It helps build that universe out. DC does not do a whole lot of that. It's kind of the opposite, right? They like their kind of segmented off stuff. And when they tried to rush and do that after Man of Steel, they made Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, which had 3 superheroes in it, which was a mess. And then they made Justice League, which, we all know how it worked out. So this idea that they're just going to keep doing that, I think is good. It's a good thing that you want your characters to cross over. You want to have synergy across properties. That's good stuff. What's confusing is you're going to put out a movie. Let's just speculate, right? Let's say 2022 or whatever, when the Batman's supposed to come out. You're telling me you could put out a Batman movie starring Robert Pattinson and then put out a Batman movie starring Ben Affleck from the same studio, and people are just supposed to go with it
and hope people don't get confused, right?
Yeah, hope people don't get confused and hope it's not too much. This is also compounding on the fact that Ben Affleck, as far as we know, is not doing any more Batman movies, right? He came back into Justice League reshoots and like that's it. and Henry Cavill is likely out on Superman. I don't think there's any real word either way, but like you're battling actor and actress fatigue, right? How many of these movies do they want to be in? How many are they contracted for? You're battling audience fatigue, trying to keep up with who's where and what properties are what. You've got multiverse you're building out. I think it's 100% confusing. I can't wait to see how they do it.
I think they should be using the term standalone a lot more. And I point to Todd Phillips' Joker, which is the standalone. It's not connected to any other of the DC universe so far that we know. Yeah. We know, but it could vary. Like that movie worked on its own, and you didn't have to try to tie it into everything else. You didn't have to say, "Oh, this is an Elseworld story," or "This is an Earth 2 or Earth 3 or negative multiverse," or whatever. You could just say, "Hey, this stands on its own." And I don't see why they couldn't just do that. Even with this new Batman, you could say, "This is a new Batman, new trilogy. It stands on its own. It's separate." That might be easier than introducing the concept of the multiverse.
I think they've really like stacked the deck, not in their favor here. Let's remember the movie that's probably going to be introducing this concept is going to be The Flash, right? The new Ezra Miller picture that's on its way. That will feature Ben Affleck as Batman and Michael Keaton as Batman, which will be tying the Tim Burton Batman films from the 80s to more relevant Batman, right? But not current Batman, because that's going to be The Batman starring Robert Pattinson coming out in 2021 or 2022. So that's already bridging some gaps, which is good. It's been indicated that like that's not going to be the only kind of jump. That The Flash is likely going to be tying a lot of these movies together and this universe together. The Flash was an otherwise defunct project until Ezra Miller, the actor in the film, decided he was going to rework the screenplay. So the actor for the movie basically wrote most of The Flash as we understand it. Maybe not. Maybe they had a lot more going on. But so now you've got your movie that's introducing this concept and tying all these universes together, written by an actor who stands to gain the most from being in the movie and not actually building like a universe. Like maybe it's a stretch. I'm just saying like this is not some brilliant by committee plan. It's kind of the opposite. It's a bit more slapdash because Batman v Superman didn't work. And Justice League didn't work, and now they don't really know where they're going. I appreciate the vision, but like the way we got here is not like Marvel, right? They didn't plan this over 22 films.
Well, also the Flash has, his solo film was introduced or was announced several years ago, and by the time it comes out, it's going to be nearly 10 years of the DCEU, and it's a big mess, and they're trying to clean it up and make it make sense at this point.
Yeah, so. I mean, like I said, I like what they're doing. I think it can work, but like, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get people on board with this stuff because as far as I think general audiences know, you got your Marvel superhero movies and I mean real general audiences, right? I mean, people who like probably don't even listen to show, people who do not know any better. These are the people who are paying to go see like Fast and the Furious 9 or whatever. Those people probably don't even know like DC movies are really linked together. They're not even, I can't even imagine they'd be sure Wonder Woman 1984 and Justice League are like the same kind of universe. I mean, It's such a stretch just in the way they've released these movies so far. So The Flash is got a lot going on, man. That movie's going to have to be like a tentpole for this to work.
What's funny is that comic book heroes are cool, but like reading comics is still not super cool, and a lot of people don't do it. And so, it's not familiar lore. It's not like, I mean, Batman's the one, kind of story everyone knows, Superman as well. But when you start introducing a lot of new characters, it's really difficult. And at the same time, their properties like Aquaman have been the most successful. It's still the most successful DC film is Aquaman. Who would have ever thought that was going to be the one to do it? We all thought it would be their big properties, but they're just being handled so poorly. But this is their chance to kind of turn it around, and this is the approach they're going to be taking.
We only got a couple minutes left to talk about this because I want to jump into Soul, but I'm curious because we were talking a little bit before the movie. Andy, is DC moving away from Zack Snyder, or are they embracing him as a filmmaker?
I think they're moving away from him. Why he was given an extra $70 million to kind of remake Justice League is beyond me. I think it's one of these things with the minority voices that were championing his vision of the film. I guess maybe sounded really loud on the internet, but I don't think that making a mediocre film that was too long, even longer, is going to save that movie or get people excited, because what do films need to do? They need to, at this day and age, either need to sell tickets or get subscribers. And that's not going to do either.
Yeah. I want to agree. At the same time, like, I don't think a studio hands out $70 million to a director, like, without that being some kind of something, right? That's got to be more than just, hey, go ahead and make this movie for exclusively for streaming services. In a lot of ways, I look at what they're doing for Zack Snyder as a olive branch, his peace offering, right? Because Zack Snyder's vision was supposed to be some kind of penultimate something in Justice League, right? This is where it was all supposed to come together. And after he took off from the project for family reasons, which are wholeheartedly sensible, they invited, in a lot of ways, hear me out, his comic book filmmaking director rival, Joss Whedon, the guy who made Avengers, in to fix what Zack Snyder had not been able to accomplish. And Joss Whedon did, I think, a decent job with what he had, but to hear DC fans tell it, he ruined the whole film. So now they've come back and said, Zack, we got it all wrong. You're the guy. You've always been the guy. We want you to come in and fix Justice League. We'll bankroll it, all right? You do it. And then we want to keep your universe prevalent. We're not getting rid of it. We're not trashing it. It'll just be a different Earth, and we can still make movies in that world. Like, that's what that feels like to me. I think they've had more success with independent features. Wonder Woman, Aquaman's a surprise, but Aquaman, Joker,
Shazam,
Man of Steel, yeah, Shazam, right? Than they have with, like, the Zack Snyder connected universe. But I think they're too scared to let it go. I think they're too scared to let it die. And they're like, you know what? It tests well enough with audiences. Well, let's greenlight another one. And letting him come back and do Justice League is their, like, peace offering to do it. Like, I think that's what's going on.
Well, see, here's the thing: is that at the end of the day, it's all about the number. It's all about the money. Man of Steel was underwhelming, underperformed. It made decent money, but it's not the 800. I mean, it didn't do as well as Wonder Woman, or any of the other. Same thing with Batman v Superman. Same thing with Justice League. So that's three big films with their hottest, best properties that he did not capitalize on. So I can't imagine them asking him to do more work. He's not getting it done.
We'll see.
At this point, Patty Jenkins and James Wan, who directed Aquaman, are the hot directors for DC.
Right. Yeah. And David Gordon Green, who did Shazam, and whoever it was that did Birds of Prey, which also wasn't bad, but we don't really talk about that movie. I don't know. We'll see. I think they've had more success with their independent directors running in independent directions than they have Zack Snyder trying to bring it all together. But who knows? This Flash movie, I think, is going to be a big turning point for the franchise, hopefully. Or it'll be a stumble, but we're just going to have to wait and find out. And with that, we need to move on to our final review. This is taking longer than I thought it would, but I'm passionate about this stuff. So comic book movies are what we do now. So without further ado, this is our review of Disney-Pixar's Soul. So Soul is the story of Joe Gardner, a 30-something New York jazz pianist who's living in the city and teaching on his off gigs because he can't afford enough to make rent just by playing music. Joe feels like he's born to play jazz. It is the thing he's been put on this earth to do. And right when he lands a gig, right when he finds one that he thinks is finally going to get him out there, is finally going to break him into something new with Dorothy Williams' band, he is unceremoniously, I don't want to say murdered. He falls into a manhole on a New York City street and wakes up in the afterlife as a soul. And he has to try to figure out how to get back to his body to make the gig and hopefully turn things around before it all ends for Joe Gardner. The movie features Jamie Foxx as Joe, our protagonist. We have Tina Fey as 22, a young soul who is following around Joe on his adventures, kind of belligerent. We've got a host of other fun actors and actresses as well, but otherwise, this is a unique feature. It's directed by Pete Docter from Pixar, who's formerly directed Monsters, Inc., Up, and Inside Out. So this one's a bit more deep than their kind of typical stuff. This movie handles death, the afterlife, the abstract, and I'm very excited to talk about it. Andy, what did you think of Soul?
So I really enjoyed it, and as a musician and as someone who's
As a
top
musician,
top,
yes.
top middle school band, it very I identified with it very well. Um, it looks incredible. Again, Pixar is always trying to push their animation and their concept, and you have a good mix of things in the both the afterlife slash kind of before time that's animated in incredible ways, and you have these characters that are like one-dimensional or like lines, but they still talk, and so you have that kind of creativity, and then you have the actual city, which is New York City, recreated in a lot of scenes, and that looks incredible as well. And I look at things like there's a trombone in the opening scene. That thing is animated so well. Like there are nicks and dents on the slide, like, and usually stuff like that is overlooked and done really inaccurately, but they really took the time to make sure everything looked right. So the film looks fantastic. It does kind of have, I think, a message that's a little bit complicated for younger audiences, because while most movies would tell you to, do whatever to chase your dreams, this movie isn't about that. It's about living your life in spite of that, and that there's more to life than just your dreams. That there's so much more, and you can be caught up and lose sight of what's important.
Yeah. Where do we start with this film? You covered all the bases. You've got performances, animation, theme, all of that's important. I want to start with plot. I guess is probably the best place to go because I really want to talk about the animation, especially talking about the horns. I'm excited to bring that up. So our plot in this movie is very similar to like Inside Out, right?
Yeah.
It's abstract. It's mostly inside of a character's head or through some kind of existential crisis, almost similar to Coco, right? That also covered the afterlife, another Pixar feature. But this idea of our main character being otherwise a well-meaning guy, who just basically has a bad day. He accidentally dies. Doesn't mean to, knows he's not supposed to be there, and is like, well, I got to fix this and get out of here. Certainly abstract, right? Finding him being so excited about this gig and turning down his opportunities to teach as a mentor at this middle school, he's certainly living for himself, right? Living for himself first and others second. And it turns out Joe Gardner's a great mentor. Right, he's tasked with teaching 22, played by Tina Fey, about what living is like, to try to encourage her to become a living person on Earth instead of just being an abstract soul who's never lived. That's kind of how this works. There's this life cycle of pre-living and post-living. Joe is in the post-living, Tina's in the pre-living. So the two of them kind of work together. Joe's struggles to get back to the real world are a lot of fun. There's a lot of humor in this movie, a lot of like one take cuts and one-off jokes that are a good time. And ultimately a little convoluted, I think, for like younger audiences. Somebody once said Pixar films are movies made for adults that kids can enjoy. This one, like 100% is that in like bold. This is like an adult film. Like I think kids will be okay with it. But like, unlike Inside Out, where I think kids would enjoy a lot of it, this one's like much more like abstract and much more thoughtful. And I think by the end of the movie, kind of the catharsis our characters finds is not going to be particularly pleasant to like an 8-year-old. Like they're, they live life every day. Like this is for adults. Like this is for people who, are jaded and cynical and maybe struggle with the way the world works, which is why it's perfect to set in New York.
Yeah, well, and that's our main character is an adult as well, so it's a more adult story, and like I said, it doesn't give you a nice and tidy kind of message. It's very kind of complicated and very different than what you would see in a lot of films. But it definitely looks amazing. Like I said, some of the stuff that's so abstract, and I was reminded of I think it is Inside Out, where they enter like 2D world. And they're like completely flat. So you get a lot of that kind of stuff here, where like just the imagination and the conceptual thinking that went into creating the abstract stuff, the non-Earth stuff, is really amazing.
Yeah, these mentors in the film that are called Jerrys, but serve as these kind of like I don't know, like they kind of ferry souls from A to B, right? Like they're really interesting, and like the afterlife, which is supposed to be on screen right now, this kind of white glowing orb of something, like fascinating, and the way souls are counted, these like abacus kind of thing. I mean, there's so much in like the afterlife stuff that's really interesting, but most of our film is spent in New York. Which is actually really cool and a great place to kind of talk about the animation. I've never been in New York City. I've always wanted to go, of course. But to hear the internet tell it, this film is like a brilliant tribute to like New York living. It feels very homegrown. It feels like what New York looks like. And I think that's good stuff. And I think the reason it does that is because of the animation. The animation is stunning in this film, in particular. The lighting and reflections is really incredible. You'll see watching this trailer, there's a lot of stage lighting. There's a lot of unique like sources of light, color. But dude, like if there's anything that really stands out, it's the horns. Oh my God, the horns look so good in this movie. Anytime there's a horn on screen, a trumpet, a trombone, a French horn, anything, I was just staring at it because it looks so good. You're right. They got all the nicks and the metal and all the fingerprints and like, it just looks so crisp. It looks better than any horn I've ever seen in my whole life. And being a movie about jazz, that's particularly important. And Pixar nails it.
Yeah, well, especially, you get a lot of scenes of Joe Gardner playing the piano and it's stunning. Like it's completely accurate. Like it doesn't insinuate. I mean, they probably had to motion capture someone actually, or performance capture someone actually playing the real thing and then animating it, because it looks amazing. It looks so convincing. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about is that it's about jazz and that it's a black protagonist, and it's largely about black community or a lot of black characters, which is kind of the first time that Pixar has done that, where it's really centered around that. So that's another really positive thing for representation.
Yeah, Pixar has started to step up their game as far as like multifaceted, multicultural characters go, protagonists. I mean, having female protagonists in Brave who's Scottish, that was a step forward. Having Coco be like a prominent feature, that was huge for them. So having a black protagonist in New York with lots of black friends and black associates is like tremendous, and really cool, because this movie doesn't feel, at least to me, and maybe this is my horrendously gentrified white reading of this movie, but like it doesn't feel necessarily like a black story. It feels like a human story. Like it feels like anybody can connect with this, even those of us who don't play music, even those of us who don't live in New York. Like ultimately, like what's happening at the core of this story about what it means to truly be alive, like is really tremendous. It reminded me of something like It's a Wonderful Life, right? George Bailey having these moments of existential humanity when he can kind of rise above the rest of his life and see how he's affected other people. I think that's really powerful stuff. And certainly Pete Docter was taking a page out of his work in Inside Out to do that. And I think it's great. I really think it's great. I don't know if I'd say it's better than Inside Out, but to the right people, I think this will ring much louder. And I really enjoyed it for that.
Yeah, and like, the story of him being a musician who's frustrated and, has a teaching gig which he doesn't like, and, I definitely can identify with that. And I've known a lot of musicians who did quote unquote make it and got these kind of performing jobs, and it wasn't all it was cracked up to be in a lot of ways, and there was a lot of sacrifice, even after they got the gig, that kind of went into it. And I know a lot of them actually move on to other things because it's just not as kind of sustainable thing, even when you've made it sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm a real bad sucker for stories like that. We watch It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas Eve, and like I love this idea of you not having to become your ideal self to enjoy being alive. Like this movie has a lot to say about life and death. It also has a lot to say about like anxiety and depression, and that stuff's really effective. It's really good. I don't. For me, it didn't quite reach the emotional highs of something like Inside Out or Up, right? But it's certainly an emotional film, and I really enjoyed what it's done for that. It's one I'm going to have to go back and watch again at some point, I think, because it's worth watching twice. I don't know if being in theaters would have made it any different for me, but like, man, I really like what this movie has to say.
There's definitely a lot of that I think, like a lot, especially a lot of the stuff that's not earthly, would look fantastic on the big screen for sure. I mean, the theatrical experience is always going to be great if you can manage it, but I was glad to also watch it at home and on my own time.
Yeah, me too.
I wanted to mention there's a lot of supporting people as well. One that stands out is Rachel House, who She knows that Joe Gardner has kind of slipped out of the going to the great beyond and is on a mission to track him down. She's really funny. She was also in Thor Ragnarok. She's one of the what do you call it? She's one of the comic relief people, and she's also in The Hunt for the Wilder People. She works with Taika Waititi a lot.
Was she the doctor? I'm thinking of the wrong person. Was she the doctor in New Mutants? The same person?
No. She's from New Zealand, and she's got a very strong like New Zealand accent. And again, she's like I said, you recognize her in Thor.
The supporting cast in this movie is like really tremendous because it's all smaller players, right? Richard Ayoade plays a character. Graham Lineman is a character. Graham Norton, I'm sorry, is a character in this movie, and they're all really fun. Like they do these great kind of whimsical voices that are really just them playing themselves, played up. But like it offers a great level of perspective because Joe Gardner, I mean, ultimately, like all of his friends are black. He's from primarily black community. I think those people are very down to earth, but for these characters that are very spiritual and like, living in this alternate universe, having these kind of wacky, like goofy voices to stand apart from like the normal folks in the movie, like I think gives both sides a lot of weight. And it makes like Joe's moments on Earth feel like really more real, right? Because they're so rooted in reality that we understand watching the film. It's abstract, but I really enjoyed it. Any other thoughts before recommendations, Andy?
I think I'm ready.
Andy, would you recommend Soul?
Absolutely. It's a really good film. It looks amazing. It's got a strong message about what it really means to be living life. It's maybe a little bit too complex for younger audiences, but there's enough fun things in the movie to kind of keep them involved, and it's not too long. It's only about an hour and 45 minutes. So I really enjoyed it. It's on Disney Plus. So yeah, highly recommended.
Yeah, I think I'd recommend it as well. It is currently available on Disney Plus, so that's where you can watch it if you'd like. It's an odd kind of film, and like I said, I don't think it necessarily reaches the emotional depths of something like Inside Out, but it's very similar in tone, and ultimately, I think if you're an adult who's a little jaded, who's maybe a little frustrated at where you're at, especially in 2020, especially in coronavirus, right, and is looking for some perspective, like you could do much worse than watching Disney-Pixar Soul. It's like 95 minutes. It's nice and tight. Animation looks great. Highly encouraged. It's good stuff. 2 thumbs up. And with that wraps our show for the week. Andy, what are we watching next week?
So we still got a couple of new films coming up. We have Promising Young Woman, which stars Carey Mulligan and is a kind of dark comedy revenge film, which I'm very excited to see. It actually came out Christmas Day. It is only in theaters, so we're going to be watching that. And then also Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is going to be streaming on Netflix, which was, of course, Chadwick Boseman's final film and also stars Viola Davis. So we'll be watching that as well.
I'm very anxious to go see Promising Young Woman. I want that movie to supersede my expectations. I've seen the trailer a couple times. I think I have an idea of what's going on in that movie and what's going to happen. I really hope it's more than that. But from what I've heard, it's really good. The box office numbers don't say it's good, but from people I know who have seen it, it's pretty tremendous. So I'm excited to go see what that's about. And the Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, it's on Netflix. Anybody can watch it. And supposedly it's also pretty solid. Chadwick Boseman's final performance. So I'm excited to watch that as well. If you enjoyed the show today, if you want to know more about what we're doing, if you're excited to hear our top 10 of 2020 list next week, you can tune into the show. You can subscribe. You can rate and review to get more of the show. You can find us on Facebook, where we stream our episodes live every single Tuesday. You can find us on YouTube, where our episodes are archived. We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're on Google Play, we're in all those places. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. And you can mail us at mail@offscriptfilmreview.com. Write us a message. Tell us what you thought about Wonder Woman 1984, what you thought about Soul, any hot takes on this DC Extended Universe stuff, or maybe some hot takes on what we're watching next week. So, that being said, thank you so much for listening. From all of us at Off Script, the home of Bold Cinema, I'm Zach Lewis.
And I'm Dr. Draper.
Thanks for listening.